You're listening to the Zen Cop Podcast.
Guys, welcome back. Mac Ron, Zen Cop here. This is the Zen Cop Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. This will be episode 7 of season 2, and I do not have a guest today. It's just me. Once in a while, I do want to hop on here and just do a show by myself. I do enjoy the guests. I know that you guys also enjoy the guests, so I'm going to keep that pretty consistent, but every so often I'm going to hop on here and just sort of do a quick podcast myself. And this one in particular, I chose the concept of loss because of whatever reason inside me told me to do it. I lost my dog on December 26th last year, so just the day after Christmas, and very sad. And I miss him a lot. So does my family. But when he passed and in the weeks following, I just sort of got taken back to a place that I've been many times before. And that is the place of despair. And it's interesting because the Vito was my dog, and he was my first dog that was, I guess, mine as an adult. And so that made it even harder. I've had dogs over the years, but Vito was my first dog that I got that was mine, and I picked him out and blah, 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 and raised him with my family. And he watched my kids grow up, and he was here when they were born and was just this really sort of powerful entity. He was an English bulldog, and he was almost 12. So for those of you who are familiar, you know that that's a very old bulldog. But anyway, that sort of spearheaded this. I've been kind of planning on talking about this since then. And it's one of those things for me where I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing to this day. I look at the positive, and I can see that it was a very good experience for me over the years, but I don't think most people know the level of loss that I've experienced in my life and within my family since a very young age. And to this day, I can 100% say that has built in a vast amount of life experience, and it gives me a very unique perspective on life itself and mortality. But it came with a price, and I would definitely argue that, I can appreciate the insight that it gave me, but I had to give up a lot to get it. And for anyone who's been in a similar scenario, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's no easy way to get through it. The aftermath time is pretty much the biggest son of a bitch in the room when it comes to grief. And you can't fast forward. You'll fail if you do. You'll make mistakes, mistakes that can be huge. So it is challenging. And every time I go through a scenario like that, I have to remind myself that I can't push this any harder. I can't force it. This is just the way it's going to be. And I was reminded of that pretty recently with Vito, where I told myself, yeah, this is going to fucking suck, and it's going to suck for a while. And now here I am, several months later, and I'm still sad. I still miss him, but it's much better than it was. Now, that's a dog. And for dog people out there, I mean, you guys know how it goes. It's losing an animal, no matter how big or small or whatever the animal is. It's a very strange thing, and it's so different than any other type of loss you'll experience as a human, because this animal that loved you so much and literally asked for nothing in return, but maybe the occasional piece of bacon and a butt scratch once in a while. But it's just a different type of loss. Now, I can also think back to other types of loss, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, where if we try to understand and, more importantly, capitalize on what loss can give us as humans. I think we will be far more successful in terms of personal growth and also utilizing that life experience to make a difference. And oddly enough, I can tell you 100% that I wouldn't be able to do any of this that I do now without that. I have the life experience that I have over the years, mostly because of loss and death. And experiencing those things over and over again gave me this unique perspective to where I can go, okay, cool. I've done it, seen it, got the t-shirt, and now I can probably help people and talk about it. And it sort of gives you that leg up, because for the first timers, right? Especially when it's unexpected, you can be there to help, and in a variety of ways. And oddly enough, when I've had people go through their own experiences, sometimes they reach out to me and say, hey, can we talk about this? And I have no problem talking about it, and more importantly, listening to what they have to say. So my story begins when I was young. My parents moved from the San Jose area to Sacramento, and I was about 5. My dad's family pretty much stayed in the Bay Area. Part of my mom's family, both my mom and my dad had big families, and my mom had all sisters and my dad had all brothers. And I can't remember the exact years, so I'm probably going to screw some of this up, but my uncle, my dad's older brother, was diagnosed with cancer. It was in his leg, and it spread fairly rapidly. They amputated his leg, and it spread to his lungs and ultimately to his brain. And I remember going over to their house when I was a kid and, seeing him in the bedroom. And I just remember that was the first time that I had really seen someone who was dying, right? Or who was essentially really sick. And it did scare me as a kid. I think I was, 10 or 11. I'm probably going to screw up the years, like I said, but young enough to where I really hadn't seen that ever before. And, saying hi to him and talking to him, I just remember feeling really uncomfortable, which was strange because I really enjoyed his company. And that bothered me as a kid. I remember thinking, like, why am I feeling this way? And a couple of weeks later, my dad's other brother, my dad had 3 brothers. My mom had 4 sisters. My dad's brother calls him and said, hey, you should probably head down here. It's not looking good. I think he's gonna pass soon. And I remember we got dressed and started getting ready and getting things in the car really fast. And this was before cell phones. So we were, the landline would ring, and the machine grabbed it, and my dad was still kind of actively doing stuff. And then he went and sort of stood in the doorway of the garage and kind of waited for the machine to catch it. For the audience who is not familiar with the answering machine, it's this really cool device from a long time ago where if the phone rang, they would pick it up. But the answering machine had a speaker attached to it, and it would play the message as it was being recorded. And my uncle said, hey, I don't know if you guys are on the road yet, but he's gone. He passed. And I saw my dad sort of like slump into the frame of the garage door. And I've seen my dad, that was the first time I saw my dad cry. And it was only one other time after that. And I remember seeing him kind of sob hysterically. And my mom went over there, and I think she like hugged him or something. And then just boom, he was done. Turned it off, got in the car, and we took off. And it was just a really quiet ride down to San Jose. And, in the days following, it was the funeral. And it was strange because I remember being at my grandma's house, and we were staying there in the interim. And I just remember the smell of like coffee constantly being made and people crying. And to this day, if you asked me, hey, what's the most consistent thing at a funeral or after someone dies, I would say it's the smell of coffee and the sound of people crying. It's just this very strange pairing that has been consistent from that experience all the way into everything else I've experienced up until today and now. But in the days that followed, the funeral happened, and then we went home, and it was strange for me because I know my parents talked to me about it, me and my brother, and, we just sort of had to process it on our own as well. And the concept of mortality and death became kind of an obsession for me as a kid. I really didn't like understand. I knew what it was, but I had a hard time like digesting that this was a reality, and not even really for me. It was more for my parents or other people. And, for those of you guys who have seen the movie, What About Bob, the son, I forget his name. He just has this strange obsession with death. And I remember watching that movie as a kid going, yeah, see, he gets it. That makes sense. But it was hard for me to understand. And it also taught me a lot, though, because I felt like I had experienced something that was kind of unique and not normal for my age group. And a few years later, my cousin, so my dad's brother's son, was 4 years old and had a very, very rare genetic disorder that ultimately required him to have surgery. And during what I think it was a bone marrow transplant, he developed a really high grade fever and died. So my 4-year-old cousin died, and that was probably one of the more, I guess, tragic deaths we have had in the family. It was very sad. And when it comes to kids dying, that's kind of, in my opinion, maybe one of the worst case scenarios. And everyone's different and everyone has their opinions. But for me, if I were to have like a scale of death, and, on one side being the, pretty bad, all the way over to the other side being like the ultimate worst case scenario, I would probably rate it as, as sibling. So loss of a sibling. Not that that's not sad, but it's something that is horrible, and you'll move forward and get on with life. And after that is loss of parents, which the younger they are and the younger you are, the more it can affect you. So you're losing kind of your leadership roles or whatever it may be, which is horrible. And then after that is loss of a spouse, your partner, your friend, your whatever it may be that you were supposed to spend the rest of your life with is now gone forever. And then at the absolute worst case scenario, the most horrible thing ever is the loss of a child. And I have that perspective now as a parent, because I can't even imagine losing one of my kids at any age. Me being alive and having them die is just, that's the worst case scenario. And so to experience that, to go through it, you probably have to have some of the most just, I guess, agonizing months, years, decades, where that pain may never go away. And it's a true test to the individual, and more importantly, I think, to the couple, that if you're able to persevere and continue, it goes to show the level of resiliency, but also the power that you have to move forward. And I'm not knocking the people who, didn't end up like that, but it does take a certain level of resiliency and internal strength to do that. So after that, we again kind of had a new appreciation for life, and I would go on to lose just kind of the normal, I guess, if I had to say it was normal. You have grandparents or whatever the case may be as people get older, and just sort of the natural stuff that's supposed to happen as we get older, and people will eventually die. But I did have 2 cousins, 2 of my mom's sister's daughters, who died. One of them was in her mid-20s and the other one in her late 20s, and both from cancer. So cancer has taken a lot of people, and in I guess a pretty rapid succession that made it very prevalent. And it seemed like every couple of years this would happen. And it was sort of becoming a common occurrence and a common theme, which is unfortunate. But with each one that happened, we, as a family, sort of developed this new level of resiliency and appreciation for life, to where we understood that this is not forever. And all of the small things started to mean a lot more. All of the Christmases or Thanksgivings or, just small get-togethers, there was a new meaning behind the term family. And my grandma said this for years, and she's still alive, and she still says it today, that family comes first. Family is everything. And she understands that now more than ever. She lost her husband, who was my dad's stepdad, but basically a father for him and his brothers from their probably late teens to early 20s on. And that was an interesting funeral because I felt like for the first time, and I think someone actually said this at the funeral, is that we're finally celebrating a celebration of life, right? We use that term a lot, but we finally got to lay to rest someone who had lived well into their 80s, who accomplished so much and who affected so many people. And that was so refreshing. And I look forward to those funerals. And that sounds really strange to say, but it's going to be so exciting to see people live far and beyond what we've seen, right, over the years. So, but another major experience for me was when I was 21. My dad was a U.S. history teacher for many years and ultimately became a administrator. He was a vice principal at a local high school. Very successful, one of the greatest guys I've ever known, if not the greatest. Kept in shape, took care of himself, ate right, did all the things he was supposed to do. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, I was living in downtown at the time." He said, "Hey, do you want to come over this weekend?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I showed up on a Saturday or whatever day it was, and he there's this table in our house, at my parents' house, and it's kind of like the dining room table, and we only used that for like Christmas, Thanksgiving, or if we were in trouble. That was like the table where we had, I don't know, we were getting yelled at or something. But so he goes over to that table, and I'm like, what did I do? I'm an adult now. I can't, whatever it is, it's out of statute. And so I sit down, and he's like, so I had my colonoscopy. My dad was in his early 50s, very early 50s. And I go, "Oh, what's that again?" He's like, "Oh, well, the colonoscopy, they basically shove a camera up your ass and look for cancer." And I said, "Oh, that sounds fun." And he's like, "Yeah, well, they did that, and they found cancer." And I remember like that sentence kind of took my breath away, and I kind of felt like my heart start to beat. And my dad looked at me, dead in the eyes, and said, "But I'm gonna beat it. I'm gonna be okay." And I was like, "Yeah, of course. Like you're Superman. Of course you're gonna beat it. Like it's not even that serious, And so the evening went on, and that was the end of that. And I drove home, and I walked into my apartment, and I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, "Hey, my dad has colon cancer." And she was just kind of like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, is that bad?" And she's like, I think so." And this is before we had the power of Google in the palm of your hand. We kind of hopped on the internet, and I started looking at the information. And for anyone who's ever done research online, and you look up like the cancer survival rate stuff can be very confusing and very dismal. And I started to kind of like look at the life expectancy, and it didn't really make any sense. And 2 weeks later, though, my dad told me that it was stage 4 cancer, which is pretty much the worst case scenario. And again, though, super positive outlook. We're going to figure this out. There's, he always told me, he said, there's a level of success through, like, these rates do say that there are people who can beat it. And my dad was someone who would never take no for an answer, and he would never allow himself to be someone who would ever accept anything, less than victory. And so the process sort of began, and it was a year-long sort of, from the chemo to the surgeries to everything else. It was about a year. And about 9 months into it, maybe even 6 months, it started to kind of become apparent that things weren't going good. He started to look different. And I remember even thinking back to when I went and saw my uncle before he died. It was kind of the same reaction of, "Oh no, like, I think you're actually dying." And about 9 months in, I went over to the house, and I hadn't been over in a couple of weeks. And I walked inside, and my dad kind of just turned the corner, and he looked so different. He looked so emaciated and sick that it kind of just made me just like, "Oh God." And it was then that I realized, okay, this is not going well. But he did make the joke that he was back down to the same weight that he was when he was playing football in high school. So that was funny as much as it wasn't. But and as time went on, things didn't go great. He had a couple of surgeries that did not go well. And in one of the surgeries, he actually coded, and he died on the operating table. My dad was not a religious person. I shouldn't say that entirely, because he was raised Catholic. We just never really were the ones that went to church. My dad would like take us to all different kinds of places of worship over the years and stuff like that. But we only pretty much went to church on Christmas at this really strange church in South Sacramento, where it was just kind of a, one of those check boxes, I guess. But I think that as time went on, though, he sort of was, I guess, craving a deeper connection with whatever the powers may be. But he did tell me, he said, I had a very unique experience. I was watching myself on the operating table. I realized that, I think I was dead. And he described sort of going through like a tunnel. He talked about the light, and then talking to someone who he believed was his brother who had died from cancer. And he kind of described like a quick conversation, and then essentially being told, not yet, and then being essentially pushed, and he felt like he fell backwards and woke up in the hospital. He told me after that, he's like, there's something more after this. There has to be. And I was like, oh, that's great. Hopefully not soon. And my dad always had a very positive attitude. I think that's where I got it from. And a few weeks later, he called me and said, hey, I have some money that I set aside. I want to go to Hawaii for Christmas, and I want to take you. I want to take girlfriend, your brother, mom, everyone's going to come. And my dad and my girlfriend were pretty close. And so we said, yeah, that sounds great. And the closer it got to Christmas, I think the closer I realized that this was probably going to be the last time that we spent Christmas together. My dad knew that too. And so it was a fun trip, but the whole time, I think in the back of my mind, I was just like, yeah, this is the last time we're going to do this together. This is the last Christmas we're going to do this together. And that hit kind of hard. And it was difficult to have a good time. I guess those are the right words. And we came home from the trip. Life sort of resumed as usual. And about a month later, my mom called me and said, hey, things are getting pretty bad. And, they always ask if you had one thing. I don't like to live with regrets, but the thing that I wish I did more was be around more. And the funny part to that is that I wish I would have just moved back home and lived with them. And, but of course my dad would never have had that. And even when I was coming around a lot, he would say, like, I know you got work, I know you're busy, don't make this a priority. And I should have come over a lot more and been there a lot more. At the time, though, what I was doing, I thought was sufficient. So I can't change that now. But if this is something that you're going through, there is not a day that goes by where if you told me, hey, you have to do X, Y, Z, and you get 5 minutes with your dad, I would do whatever X, Y, Z is. I don't even care, because that's how badly I want it now. So just hindsight 2020. But my mom calls me. She says, yeah, things are getting pretty bad. I think we're close. And I said, okay. And so I came over that weekend, and my mom had called me, I think that same day, and said, I think we're getting really close. And I came home, brought my girlfriend at the time, and we're in the house hanging out. My mom's like, yeah, you guys can go in there and talk to him and essentially go say goodbye. My girlfriend went first, and then my brother, and then it was my turn. And I walked into the room. It was a downstairs bedroom. They had moved everything downstairs because it was just easier. He didn't have to go up down the stairs. He could just walk around downstairs easily and easier for everybody. And I walked in the room, sat down next to him, and his respirations were super shallow and very long in between each breath. And he couldn't talk. His eyes were closed. He didn't really acknowledge anything, but he was, around. He was there. I knew that he could hear me, and this is important later. But I talked to him for a while, and it's so strange because now being a dad and having kids of my own, I understood his level of concern and frustration when it came to my future. I was at the time kind of trying to figure out what I really wanted to do career-wise. And my dad had always supported me in anything I wanted to do. He would, whatever it was, he would support me through it and say, yeah. And his rule was, whatever you do, just be passionate about it and be good at it and make a difference in this part of the world. And he explained to me when I was young that I could make a difference to him whatever I did, as long as I did it well, and did it with the intent of, trying to serve a purpose in this world. And As I got older, I established that into my own rule, which is for me, and what I'm going to teach my children is that I have to give more than I take. That's my rule in life. And if I do that, then that's good enough. And I told him about how I would, figure my shit out, and, I'd take care of my family. I'd take care of my brother and my mom, and that, he wouldn't have anything to worry about. Cause that's kind of the big fear, right? My dad grew up in a household with an abusive father who ultimately left. And my dad saw the effects of that firsthand. He saw it at the high school where he worked, which wasn't a great one, where, essentially fatherless families were not destined for anything great when there was no one in control. And I'm not saying that mothers aren't powerful or have any, don't have any pull, but from my own experiences and what I've seen at work, especially too, is that there's just something about a father figure in the house. Traditionally, he is the master and commander. He's the one that offers support, security, love, all these things that do and can come from mom. But at the end of the day, in my particular household, and I think a lot of other households, the presence of a father is just unsurpassed. It's something that is so important, and when it's removed, things can go sideways and rather quickly. So I was talking about that with him and just kind of saying, like, you've taught me a lot, and you've given me this blueprint that I get to use now as a 21-year-old, and eventually I'll be a dad someday, and I get to use it then. And I walked out of the room and went over to the computer area for the younger audience. Back in the early 2000s and such, there wasn't the internet and cell phones and all that really wasn't a thing yet. So the computer usually had its own room. It was called the computer room or the computer area, where everyone kind of got to use the computer. So that was the computer area for my home at this time. And I sat down, and my brother and my girlfriend were in the same room. We were just kind of sitting there chatting, and I was on the computer. And in the movie The Matrix, I'm not a Matrix guru, so I don't know the terminology, but when they, sort of sit down in the chair and go to the other side, there's this device that goes into the back of their head, and they have like a port, like a hole in the back of their head. And I felt like that thing got removed out of the back of my head, so much so that it made me sit up, and I actually said out loud, "Dad's dead." And my brother was like, "What?" And I said it again, "Dad's dead." He's like, "How do you know?" I said, I just know. And I got up, I walked over to the bedroom door, and I opened it, and I stood there. I don't know how long, but it felt like forever. And I was waiting to see him breathe, and he did not. And I walked over to the bed. At the time, I had my EMT certification and all these other things under my belt, and I didn't check for a pulse. I got down like close to the bed, and I put my ear to his chest to listen for a heartbeat, which to this day, I look back on it, that was such a strange and like juvenile-like thing to do. And I waited, and I didn't hear anything. And then I just sort of sat there staring at him, and it was weird. I remember just thinking, he looks different. He looks like his soul's not in his body. And after you see enough dead people that you knew before, there's just something that's gone now, which sort of absolutely reinforces the concept that this skin suit and bones and all these things that we're running around in is just something that we wear. And when the soul leaves the body, it's pretty evident that it's not there anymore. And I walk back out to the living room, and I say, "Yeah, he's gone." And I look at my younger brother, and I say, "Go tell mom." And he says, "Fuck you, you go tell mom." Kind of just like, all right, fine. So I walk upstairs. My mom had gone upstairs earlier to take a shower. I think I could hear the blow dryer going. And I walk upstairs, and she kind of just turns around and looks at me. And I said, "Yeah, he's Dad's gone." And she said, "What?" And I said, "Dad's dead." And she kind of just walked over and just collapsed into my arms and just started sobbing hysterically. And it felt like forever. And I remember I sat her down on the bed, and I said something like, "Okay, well, I got to start making some phone calls, and we need to circle the wagons and let people know what happened." And I started making phone calls, let people know. And within about an hour, people started showing up at the front door, and my dad's brothers were there. And my grandma, my dad's mom, walked in the house, and she kind of made her way to this, I guess it's like a hallway that goes into the next room. And I remember she said something to the effect like, is it true? Or did it happen? And then she just kind of like, not collapses, but sort of like loses her balance a little bit. And I think my uncle grabbed her, and this sound, this scream that came out of her mouth was one that I heard for the first time then, but I would hear it many more times as the years would go on at work. The sound of a mother screaming at the loss of a child is a sound that is so unique and so powerful and scary. I can hear it in my head now, and it came from the deepest part of her stomach all the way up through her throat, and it was just the sound of pure agony. And I was sad, and I felt bad for her at the time. But as time went on and I got older and I became a parent myself, I now fully understand the totality of what she was experiencing as a mother of 4 boys, and now having lost 2 to the same disease, and within a fairly close date range. I can't even begin to imagine the level of pain that she was feeling at that time, and the just utter despair that must have been going and flowing through her body. And more people started showing up. And again, kind of that reference again to sobbing and coffee. Pretty soon the coffee was getting made and people were crying, and it just sort of is that just thing that happens. You put a pot of coffee on, and at that time it was probably 2:00 in the morning when everyone started showing up. And one of the weird things that I'll never forget, my dad was an animal lover. He loved our cat probably more so than the dog. The dog was kind of a weirdo. But after my dad died, and within like a minute or two, both the animals were in the room, and the cat he absolutely loved. The cat crawled onto the bed and laid on top of his chest and started doing this meow that was not anything I'd ever heard before. It was this very strange, almost like a distress call. And it was so weird because I've seen that many times since, but that was my first time seeing an animal's reaction to death. They know, they're very much aware of what happened, and they know when someone dies. And after that, it was hard moving forward. This kind of goes back to my speaking points on leadership and fathers in the family. It was challenging because it's just different. It's different when you lose a leadership role in the family, and a good one too, right? We could all say that there's different forms of leadership and different styles that certain people, choose to utilize as parents or as leaders, but we had a really good one. And it was hard because after that, now it's up for us to make these decisions. And my brother in particular, he was very young. I think he was 18, doing the math in my head real quick, 18, 19 years old, and was going to go start at Cal Poly. And, after that, and that's something that, it's a different story and different topic entirely, but the challenges that my brother faced over the years as a direct result of losing our dad was very real. And then my mom and the challenges that she faced. I mean, everyone, right? Everyone was now going to have their own unique challenges ahead of them. And going back to my comparison of loss, right? You have all these different viewpoints, and everyone sort of experiencing, a very challenging experience, or maybe the worst case scenario experience, or however it was, depending on the relationship. His funeral, though, was a true testament to who he was as a person. And I remember we were talking about venues, and we were trying to figure out where the best place to host would be. And judging by the anticipated attendance of students, because he was a vice principal, there was much discussion over, where it would need to take place. And ultimately, we decided to do it at the school in the auditorium, which could house quite a few people. And I remember we got to sit in the front row, obviously, because we're family and we were the first ones in there. I just remember it taking a long time for everybody to get seated. And I was the first one to speak. And when I stood up on the podium on the stage, I remember looking up and just going, holy shit, there's a lot of people in here. And it was standing room only, and there were still people outside standing. I don't want to give a number because I'll probably get it wrong, but I believe it was something to the effect of there were like 5 times more people than we thought would show up. And a lot of them were students. And I spoke first, and a couple uncles. I can't remember exactly who all spoke family wise, but it was all really good. And then they opened it up to the audience to speak. And before we knew it, there was a line of people that went from the stage, wrapped around the entire audience, and almost went to the back door. And everyone was saying the same thing. And it was just really, it was powerful to hear how many people were affected by my father and his presence in their life. And a lot of it was just school related. It was him taking the extra time to talk to a student and to, change their viewpoint or give them some advice. And my dad was really genuine in that regard. There's a lot of people who take on the administrative role and just assume it's a promotion and it's less work to do. My dad was the opposite. Really dove into it and would find kids, especially who he knew needed the assistance, and he would give it to them if they would take it. And he was really into football, really into sports. And ultimately the stadium was named after him at that school, which was awesome. And we get to go to the memorial game every year and do the coin toss and all that stuff. But looking back on it and all of the things that I experienced at the time, oddly enough, I didn't cry when he died. I didn't cry in the months after or even the years after, which was always so strange to me. I don't know why that happened the way it did. And I won't say never cried. I mean, like fully processed and grieved everything. I think I was so hell-bent on trying to fix things and do things. And I don't know, maybe I skipped that part, and this is kind of something that's important to remember for those of you who are going through it now, or maybe we'll go through it in the future. The things for me that made me upset, or the things that stung the most, were when, I guess, scenarios where I wanted him to be there. So obviously, career stuff is important, and there's just something different about mom and dad. And I think if you agree with that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm sorry. But my dad, I always wanted to, I wanted to make my dad proud of me. That's like the number one thing. And I know that everyone says, oh, spiritually, he's there. And I get that. And I acknowledge that, but it's not the same. It's not. I wanted my dad to, when I got into the academy, like, hey, I got in, cool. Don't screw this up. All right, cool. I won't. Encouraging me and, just being there for me. And then finally, Dad, I graduated the academy. Awesome. To have him, my mom pinned me at my academy graduation, but I wanted my dad to do that. I wanted my dad to be there and to see. And then it hit me again when I had my first child, my son, and all I wanted was my dad to be there. My mom was great. She still is. She's an amazing grandma, but my dad would have been so fun. Like if you knew my dad, you would have, oh man, he would have been the coolest grandpa ever. And then I had my second son, same thing. Boom, reality hit. I got that hit of like, man, I wish he was here. Work, promotions at work, awards that I got at work, all of those things where, I even got Deputy of the Year in 2017. I was so excited. But then I got like this kind of kick to the gut where I was like, man, I really wish, like, that's one of those things where, I even if it was, I guess pick your poison for accomplishments. That's a big deal. And whenever you get those big deals, you just want that, that person, whoever it may be, right? I shouldn't just limit it to father figures, but if you have someone who is now gone, the feeling. And that would continue when I got detectives. That was another one. So just, it's this thing that happened for me later where I started to realize that the things that were the most important to me in that regard hadn't happened yet. I was still too young. And then as I became older and became a parent and all these other things, it's definitely one of the things in my life that has given me an abundance of life experience combined with all the other things that I experienced in terms of life and death. And it not only made me a better husband, a better father, it made me a better cop. It made me a better person. And you can't teach those things. That's the frustrating part. And in no way, shape, or form would I be like, hey, you got to have a lot of family die before you can figure this shit out. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that any form of life experience is more than likely going to offer you so much more value and purpose and, I guess, learning than anything else you can read in a book or study or go to school for. So these things that are horrible, these things that we experience, and I've talked about this and I've said this a lot, and it's the one thing that I really try to hammer more than anything, is that adversity itself is going to be one of the most amazing things you can experience as a human being. And at the time, again, going back to the concept of loss or challenge, sometimes time is the only solution, right? Talking about Vito and how, looking back to how upset I was in December versus now, well, that's just a timeline. And grief is a timeline that you cannot fast forward. But in the interim, the things that you will learn as a result, and you can talk to anyone who's experienced any type of loss before, and they're going to tell you the same thing. And this, of course, is the perspective where it's probably years from when it happened, that they learned the most about themselves. They learned the most about who they could count on, family, friends. They saw who their true support system was. And they also learned a lot of very interesting things about themselves. Looking back on that and being the age that I am, I feel like even though it was challenging, the amount of life experience that I was able to obtain during those times of challenge and pain is just something that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. So in that regard, whenever you do have moments of adversity, challenge, and especially pain, don't try to cheat yourself by not taking a big bite, because it will make sense later and you'll thank yourself later. And, I'm not the first person to say this, but adversity is one of the meanest teachers you'll ever meet. She's ruthless and cruel, but she will never, ever lie to you. And that is why it's so important to trust the process, trust adversity. And when it does come your way, because eventually it will, embrace it. Don't run away from it. It'll do more good than harm in the long run. So guys, that's all I got. Thank you for listening. And like I said, once in a while, I'm going to hop on here and maybe I'll tell a story, or I will talk about, something relevant that's happening in the world. That being said, I will be back next week. I have some really cool guests in the hopper I'm really excited about, and season 2 has been really fun so far. I'll reference the California Dreaming series again. If you guys have not listened to those, please do. Some very powerful guests I had on that show, really powerful people. And I really enjoyed hearing their stories. And some of them in particular were extremely emotional and just very, very eye-opening. If you have the time, check them out. And if you are a YouTube listener, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you are an Apple or Spotify listener, please drop a rating below. All of that stuff does help as I'm trying to gain a larger platform and a larger audience. On that note, guys, thanks again. I appreciate you listening, and I will be back next week. Have a safe week and happy St. Patrick's Day. Watch The Departed, eat some corned beef, and be safe.